Picture this. A person is declared clinically dead. Their heart has stopped beating. Their brain shows zero activity. To the doctors in the room, they're gone. But then, minutes, sometimes even hours later, they come back. And they come back with stories. Stories so vivid, so detailed, and so utterly impossible, they force us to question everything we know about life and death. We're not talking about fuzzy memories or dreams. We're talking about verifiable accounts of events that happened while these people were, by all medical definitions, deceased. These are the kinds of experiences that have taken hardened skeptics, doctors, and scientists who built their careers on cold, hard facts and left them profoundly shaken, unable to explain what they've witnessed. For a long time, the near-death experience, or NDE, was relegated to the fringes, a topic for late-night talk shows. That all started to change in 1975 with Dr. Raymond Moody's landmark book, Life After Life. He gave the phenomenon its name and was the first to systematically collect these accounts, noticing a startling pattern: a tunnel, a brilliant light, a feeling of overwhelming peace, and meetings with loved ones who had passed on. But today, the game has completely changed. Science itself is now discovering evidence that suggests the line between life and death is far blurrier than we ever imagined. What you are about to hear are not just 10 stories. They are 10 direct challenges to the scientific status quo, 10 anomalies that defy our understanding of consciousness, and 10 reasons why some of the most brilliant minds in medicine are now asking a question they once dismissed: what really happens when we die? Section 1. The case of Dr. Mary Neal, the surgeon who drowned for our first case. We have a story that is uniquely powerful because the person who lived it was a scientist herself. Dr. Mary Neal isn't a professional mystic. She's an orthopedic spine surgeon. Her entire life was dedicated to the physical, the tangible, the provable. Her world was one of bone, tissue, and the complex mechanics of the human body. Spirituality was something she acknowledged, but kept at arm's length. That all changed in 1999 during a kayaking trip in a remote part of Chile. Dr. Neal, an experienced kayaker, was on the Phi River when her boat got pinned at the bottom of a waterfall. The force of the water was immense, holding her completely submerged. As her lungs burned for air, a strange and unexpected calm washed over her. Instead of panic, she felt a physical sensation of being held and comforted. She surrendered, asking that God's will be done. And in that moment, her consciousness just detached. She later described feeling more alive and more conscious than ever before. While her friends desperately tried to free her body, which was now purple and bloated after an estimated 30 minutes without oxygen, her spirit was on a journey. She described being greeted by beings who radiated pure love and being guided down a breathtakingly beautiful path toward a great, domed structure of light. She knew, with total certainty, that this was the point of no return. But the beings communicated to her that it wasn't her time. They told her she had to go back, which filled her with sadness, because she longed to stay in that place of perfect peace. Meanwhile, back on the river, the impossible was happening. Her body was somehow freed from the kayak and bumped into one of her rescuers downstream. They pulled her to shore and began CPR, reviving a woman who should have been dead or, at the very least, severely brain damaged. And the strange coincidences didn't stop. In a remote jungle with no roads or cell service, a group of young men appeared out of nowhere, carried her on a makeshift stretcher to a dirt path, where an ambulance was inexplicably waiting. Upon her recovery, Dr. Neal, the analytical surgeon, tried everything to find a rational explanation for her experience. She reviewed her own case with a scientist's critical eye, looking for evidence of hallucination or some neurological quirk caused by oxygen deprivation, but she couldn't find one. The clarity of her journey, coupled with the series of improbable events that led to her rescue, left her with only one conclusion. What she experienced was not a product of a dying brain. It was real. Her story is a powerful start to our list because it comes from inside the scientific community, a skeptical doctor who drowned and returned with a testimony that forced her peers to confront the limits of their own understanding. Section 2. The Case of Pam Reynolds, the woman who saw her own brain surgery. Perhaps no case in the history of NDE research has been more scrutinized, more debated, and more challenging to science than that of Pam Reynolds. For many, her experience is the single most compelling piece of evidence that consciousness can exist outside the brain, because it happened under the strictest medical conditions you can imagine. In 1991, Pam Reynolds, a singer-songwriter, was diagnosed with a giant aneurysm at the base of her brain. Its location made a normal operation impossible. Her only shot was a radical and incredibly risky procedure called deep hypothermic circulatory arrest, nicknamed Operation Standstill, and it's as extreme as it sounds. Pam's body temperature was lowered to a frigid 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. Her heart and breathing were stopped. The blood was drained from her head, and her brainwaves went completely flat. For all intents and purposes, Pam Reynolds was clinically dead. To make sure she had no sensory input, her eyes were taped shut and molded speakers were placed in her ears, blasting a series of loud clicks to confirm her brainstem was totally unresponsive. This is the critical point. Her brain was off, her body was inert, and her senses were blocked. Yet, this is when her experience began. Pam later said she felt a pop and then found herself floating out of her body, looking down from above her surgeon's shoulder. From there, she watched her own operation. She described the surgical team working on her head. Most shockingly, she described the bone saw they used. She said it looked like an electric toothbrush and sounded like a dentist's drill. She also reported hearing a female surgeon say that the arteries on one side of her body were too small for the procedure, a detail that was later confirmed by surgical records. The details she gave were astonishingly accurate. The Midas Rex saw used in neurosurgery does look like an electric toothbrush. The conversation about her arteries did happen. How could she know any of this? She was clinically dead. Her brain wasn't working, her eyes were taped, and her ears were blocked with 90-decibel clicks. While some critics have suggested anesthesia awareness could be an explanation, that phenomenon requires a functioning brain to process information, something Pam simply didn't have at the time. But her experience didn't stop there. She felt herself being pulled into a tunnel of light where she met deceased relatives, including her grandmother and uncle. They guided her, but told her she had to go back. Her uncle eventually led her back to her body, which she described as a lifeless tube she was reluctant to re-enter. The feeling of returning was like plunging into a pool of ice. Cardiologist Michael Sabin, who meticulously investigated her case, was stunned after corroborating every detail with the surgical team. The surgeons themselves were baffled. While the case is still debated, the core facts remain a monumental challenge to the materialistic view of consciousness. It suggests that even when the brain is completely inactive, a center of awareness can not only exist, but can perceive its environment with startling clarity. Section 3. The Case of Dr. Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon's proof of heaven. If you wanted to design the perfect person to debunk near-death experiences, you'd probably come up with someone like Dr. Eben Alexander. Before his own NDE, Dr. Alexander was a respected academic neurosurgeon who had taught at Harvard Medical School. He was a man of science to his core. He believed consciousness was just a byproduct of the brain's complex wiring. DEs, in his professional opinion, were just hallucinations produced by a brain under extreme stress. Then, in 2008, his entire world was turned upside down. Dr. Alexander contracted a rare and aggressive form of bacterial meningitis. The E. coli bacteria attacked his neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for literally everything that makes us human: thought, language, emotion, and perception. His brain was, quite literally, being eaten away. He fell into a deep coma, and his doctors gave him less than a 10% chance of survival. For 7 days, he lay unresponsive while his brain scans showed virtually no cortical activity. Neurologically speaking, the person known as Eben Alexander was gone, but he wasn't gone. He was on the most profound journey of his life. He ascended from a primitive, muddy state of being into a vibrant, hyper-real world of lush valleys and crystalline pools. He described flying over this landscape on the wing of a butterfly, accompanied by a beautiful woman who communicated with him without words, telling him he was cherished and had nothing to fear. He then ascended further into what he called the core, a place of infinite darkness that was somehow full of light and unconditional love, where he felt a direct connection with a divine, creative source. Now here's the scientific puzzle. His NDE was incredibly complex and structured, yet it happened while his neocortex, the supposed generator of consciousness, was completely offline. His brain was so compromised, it shouldn't have been able to produce a simple dream, let alone an ultra-real odyssey. After 7 days, just as doctors were considering ending life support, he opened his eyes. He made a full and miraculous recovery. As a neurosurgeon, he spent months trying to find a scientific explanation. He scrutinized his own medical records, considering every theory from brainstem activity to a massive DMT release. He concluded that none of them fit the data. The duration and complexity of his experience, combined with the total shutdown of his cortex, made it a medical impossibility from his perspective. Dr. Alexander, the ultimate skeptic, was forced to conclude his consciousness had traveled to another dimension. He published his story in the book Proof of Heaven, which ignited a firestorm of debate. While critics have pointed to inconsistencies in his story and offered alternative, neurological explanations, his testimony remains a direct challenge from a seasoned neuroscientist to his own field. A call to consider that our existence may be far grander than we believe. Section 4. The case of Anita Moorjani. A miraculous healing. Some NDEs are stunning because of their verifiable details. Others because of the scientific credentials of the person having them. The case of Anita Moorjani is in a league of its own. It is one of the most powerful and well-documented cases ever because it ended in a medical outcome. That simply shouldn't be possible. A seemingly instantaneous remission from end-stage cancer. In 2002, Anita Moorjani was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. For 4 years, she fought it, but the disease spread relentlessly. By February 2, 2006, her body was shutting down. The cancer was everywhere. She had tumors the size of lemons, her lungs were filled with fluid, and her organs were failing. That morning, she slipped into a coma. Her doctors told her family she had less than 36 hours to live. As her body lay dying, Anita's consciousness expanded. She described it not as leaving her body, but as becoming aware of everything, everywhere, all at once. She was aware of the doctors working on her, of her family's conversations down the hall, and even of a conversation her doctor was having on the phone, hundreds of miles away, details she later verified, to everyone's shock. In this expanded state, she was bathed in a feeling of unconditional love. She met her deceased father and best friend, who told her it wasn't her time to die. She was given a profound understanding of why she had gotten cancer. She saw it wasn't a punishment, but the physical manifestation of a life lived in fear. In that realm, she understood that if she chose to return to her body, it would heal. She was given a choice: stay in that blissful place or return to her cancer-riddled body. Armed with this new understanding that her true self was powerful and that fear had made her sick, she chose to come back and live fearlessly. About 30 hours after falling into the coma, Anita opened her eyes. What happened next defies medical science. Within 4 days, her tumors had shrunk by about 70%. The fluid in her lungs vanished. Her organs started functioning again. Her doctors were in a state of shock, running test after test, unable to explain what they were seeing. Within 5 weeks, they couldn't find a single trace of cancer. Anita Morjani was cancer-free. Her oncologist stated that he could not explain her rapid recovery. While spontaneous remissions do happen, they are incredibly rare and usually occur over a much longer time. Anita's recovery was practically immediate. Her story is a testament not just to consciousness surviving death, but to the profound and mysterious link between our minds, our emotions, and our physical health.
Section 5. The Denture Man, a verifiable out-of-body experience. Not all of the most compelling NDEs belong to people who become famous. Some of the most significant accounts come from ordinary people, documented by diligent researchers. One such case, a classic in the field, is the story of the Denture Man. It was documented by Dutch cardiologist Dr. Pim van Lommel in his groundbreaking study published in the medical journal The Lancet. The story involves a 44-year-old man brought into the hospital unconscious after a massive heart attack. As the medical team rushed to resuscitate him, a nurse removed his dentures and placed them on the crash cart, the wheeled trolley with all the emergency equipment. After a long and difficult resuscitation, the man was stabilized and moved to the ICU, still in a coma. A week later, now conscious on the cardiac ward, he saw the same nurse. He immediately said, "Oh, that nurse, she knows where my dentures are." The nurse was confused. The man had been completely comatose when she took them. There was no way he could have known it was her. She asked him how he knew, who then described the entire resuscitation scene in stunning detail from a vantage point near the ceiling. He said he watched them working on his body, worried they would give up. And then he made the crucial, verifiable claim. He told the nurse he saw her take his dentures out and put them in a small drawer on the lower shelf of the crash cart. He described the cart and her exact action. Completely shocked, the nurse went to get the crash cart. She opened the drawer the patient had described, and there they were, his dentures, exactly where he said she'd put them. This case is so powerful because it's so simple and mundane. This wasn't a grand vision of heaven, but the observation of a lost object. The information was trivial, but the implications are monumental. Skeptics often suggest patients might overhear conversations or piece together memories, but that fails completely here. The patient was in a coma. He couldn't see or hear. His brain wasn't processing information in any normal way. He knew who took his dentures, where she put them, and could describe the specific cart where they were hidden. Researchers call this a veridical perception, an observation of a real-world event that S verified as true, but that the person couldn't have perceived through normal senses. Dr. Van Lommel points to cases like this as some of the strongest evidence that consciousness can, in fact, operate independently of the body and its senses.
Section 6. The Case of Colton Burpo. The Boy Who Knew Too Much. The story of Colton Burpo, made famous by the book and movie Heaven is for Real, is one of the most widely known modern NDEs. And while it's faced its share of skepticism, it contains details that are incredibly hard to dismiss as just childhood fantasy. What makes Colton's case so powerful is his age. In 2003, When he was just shy of 4 years old, he had no complex ideas about the afterlife. He just reported what he saw with the disarming simplicity of a child. Colton's ordeal began with a ruptured appendix that was initially misdiagnosed. He underwent emergency surgery and nearly died on the table. It was months later that he began to casually share details of his experience. He told his parents that while he was in surgery, he left his body and looked down, seeing the doctors working on him. More specifically, he saw his dad in a small room praying, and his mom in another room, talking on the phone and praying. His parents confirmed that's exactly what they were doing, separated and frantic during the operation. That alone is remarkable, but the details went further. Colton calmly told his mother, "You had a baby die in your tummy, didn't you?" His parents were floored. They had never told Colton about the miscarriage his mother, Sonia, had suffered years before he was born. When they asked how he knew, he said he met his sister in heaven. He said she looked familiar and was excited to see him, telling him she couldn't wait for their parents to get there. For his mother, this was a profoundly healing revelation of information her son should not have had. Another astonishing detail involved his great-grandfather, Pop, who died more than 20 years before Colton was born. Colton said he met him in heaven. When his dad showed him a picture of Pop as an old man, Colton said that wasn't what he looked like, explaining that everyone in heaven is young. Later, his dad found a much older photo of his grandfather as a young man. When he showed it to Colton, the boy's face lit up. That's him. There was no way Colton could have ever seen that picture. Skeptics argue Colton could have been an imaginative child influenced by his religious upbringing, or that he overheard conversations. But these explanations struggle to account for the specific information he provided. How does a 4-year-old invent a story about a miscarried sister he was never told about? Or correctly identify a decades-old photo of a relative he'd never seen? The case forces a difficult question. Was this a series of incredibly lucky guesses? Or did this little boy genuinely visit a place where he learned things that were impossible for him to know? Section 7. The case of Dr. George Rodonaya. 3 days in a morgue. When it comes to the sheer duration of an NDE, few stories are as extreme as that of Dr. George Rodonaya. In 1976, Rodonaya wasn't just a skeptic. He was a staunch, card-carrying atheist in the Soviet Union. As a neuropathologist and psychiatrist, his entire worldview was built on materialism. He believed life was a purely biological event that ended when the brain did. His life, however, was about to take a turn that would not only demolish his atheism, but also put him through one of the longest clinically documented NDEs on record. That year, Rodonaya, a known political dissident, was hit by a car in what he believed was a KGB assassination attempt. He was pronounced dead, and his body was transported to a morgue, where it lay in cold storage for 3 days. For 72 hours, George Rodonaya was, medically speaking, a corpse, but his consciousness was anything but dead. He later described being plunged into total darkness, a terrifying void where his only thought was, "How can I be when I am not?" He slowly realized he could navigate this darkness with his thoughts, moving through walls and traveling vast distances. He observed his grieving wife and children, witnessing their pain in real time. He saw things happening in the hospital and beyond, all while his physical body was lying in a morgue freezer. His experience then shifted from observing Earth to exploring the very fabric of reality. He described experiencing all of history, past, and future at once. He saw life at a molecular level, understanding the intricate dance of creation. He was flooded with universal knowledge and an all-encompassing love. He came to understand that life was not a random accident, but an interconnected part of a grand, living universe, and he identified the source of it all as God. The story takes its most dramatic turn on day 3. Because his was a political case, an autopsy was required. As the surgeon made the first incision into his abdomen, Radonaya described a tremendous force shoving him back into his body. He woke up on the autopsy table, shivering and in pain, to the absolute horror of the medical staff. The man who awoke was not the same man who was hit by the car. The staunch atheist was gone, replaced by a man with unshakable faith. The experience so profoundly altered his life that he abandoned his career in neuropathology, earned a second doctorate in the psychology of religion, and became an ordained priest. Dr. Rodonaya's credentials as a neuropathologist, the documented 3-day duration of his clinical death, and his radical life transformation make his case a pillar in NDE research. Section 6. The Case of Colton Burpo. The Boy Who Knew Too Much, the story of Colton Burpo, made famous by the book and movie Heaven is for Real, is one of the most widely known modern NDEs. And while it's faced its share of skepticism, it contains details that are incredibly hard to dismiss as just childhood fantasy. What makes Colton's case so powerful is his age. In 2003, when he was just shy of 4 years old, he had no complex ideas about the afterlife. He just reported what he saw with the disarming simplicity of a child. Colton's ordeal began with a ruptured appendix that was initially misdiagnosed. He underwent emergency surgery and nearly died on the table. It was months later that he began to casually share details of his experience. He told his parents that while he was in surgery, he left his body and looked down, seeing the doctors working on him. More specifically, he saw his dad in a small room praying, and his mom in another room, talking on the phone and praying. His parents confirmed that's exactly what they were doing, separated and frantic during the operation. That alone is remarkable, but the details went further. Colton calmly told his mother, "You had a baby die in your tummy, didn't you?" His parents were floored. They had never told Colton about the miscarriage his mother, Sonia, had suffered years before he was born. When they asked how he knew, he said he met his sister in heaven. He said she looked familiar and was excited to see him, telling him she couldn't wait for their parents to get there. For his mother, this was a profoundly healing revelation of information her son should not have had. Another astonishing detail involved his great-grandfather, Pop, who died more than 20 years before Colton was born. Colton said he met him in heaven. When his dad showed him a picture of Pop as an old man, Colton said that wasn't what he looked like, explaining that everyone in heaven is young. Later, his dad found a much older photo of his grandfather as a young man. When he showed it to Colton, the boy's face lit up. That's him. There was no way Colton could have ever seen that picture. Skeptics argue Colton could have been an imaginative child influenced by his religious upbringing, or that he overheard conversations. But these explanations struggle to account for the specific information he provided. How does a 4-year-old invent a story about a miscarried sister he was never told about? Or correctly identify a decades-old photo of a relative he'd never seen? The case forces a difficult question. Was this a series of incredibly lucky guesses? Or did this little boy genuinely visit a place where he learned things that were impossible for him to know? Section 7. The Case of Dr. George Rodonaya. 3 days in a morgue. When it comes to the sheer duration of an NDE, few stories are as extreme as that of Dr. George Rodonaya. In 1976, Rodonaya wasn't just a skeptic. He was a staunch, card-carrying atheist in the Soviet Union. As a neuropathologist and psychiatrist, his entire worldview was built on materialism. He believed life was a purely biological event that ended when the brain did. His life, however, was about to take a turn that would not only demolish his atheism, but also put him through one of the longest clinically documented NDEs on record. That year, Radonaya, a known political dissident, was hit by a car in what he believed was a KGB assassination attempt. He was pronounced dead, and his body was transported to a morgue, where it lay in cold storage for 3 days. For 72 hours, George Rodonaya was, medically speaking, a corpse. but his consciousness was anything but dead. He later described being plunged into total darkness, a terrifying void where his only thought was, "How can I be when I am not?" He slowly realized he could navigate this darkness with his thoughts, moving through walls and traveling vast distances. He observed his grieving wife and children, witnessing their pain in real time. He saw things happening in the hospital and beyond, all while his physical body was lying in a morgue freezer. His experience then shifted from observing Earth to exploring the very fabric of reality. He described experiencing all of history, past, and future at once. He saw life at a molecular level, understanding the intricate dance of creation. He was flooded with universal knowledge and an all-encompassing love. He came to understand that life was not a random accident, but an interconnected part of a grand, living universe, and he identified the source of it all as God. The story takes its most dramatic turn on day 3. Because his was a political case, an autopsy was required. As the surgeon made the first incision into his abdomen, Radonaya described a tremendous force shoving him back into his body. He woke up on the autopsy table, shivering and in pain, to the absolute horror of the medical staff. The man who awoke was not the same man who was hit by the car. The staunch atheist was gone, replaced by a man with unshakable faith. The experience so profoundly altered his life that he abandoned his career in neuropathology, earned a second doctorate in the psychology of religion, and became an ordained priest. Dr. Radonaya's credentials as a neuropathologist, the documented 3-day duration of his clinical death, and his radical life transformation make his case a pillar in NDE research. Section 8. The case of Vicky Noratuk. Sight for a blind woman. Most of us take sight for granted. We open our eyes, and the world rushes in. But the brain's visual cortex has to learn from infancy how to interpret signals from our eyes. So, what would happen if someone who had been blind from birth, who had never seen a single thing, had an out-of-body experience? The case of Vicky Noratuk provides a stunning and scientifically baffling answer. Vicky was born blind. An excess of oxygen in her incubator destroyed her optic nerve. Her world was one of touch, sound, and smell. As she put it, "I've never seen anything. No light, no shadows, no nothing." Sight was a concept as foreign to her as a sixth sense. In her early 20s, Vicky was in a serious car accident and slipped into a coma. That's when her NDE began. The first thing she recalled was floating near the ceiling of the emergency room, looking down. And for the first time in her life, she could see. The experience was confusing. She had no frame of reference for this new sense. She saw the chaotic scene below, with a body on a gurney. She was disoriented until she recognized her own wedding ring on the body's finger, and then her long hair. That's when it hit her. Is this my body down there? And am I dead or what? Her out-of-body experience was remarkably clear. She was able to see the doctors and nurses, and later recalled specific details of the room. Her consciousness then traveled beyond the hospital, through a tunnel, and into a realm of brilliant light she described as heaven. There, she saw fields of grass, trees, and encountered spiritual beings, including friends who had also been blind in life, but could now see perfectly. The world she described was vibrant and full of color, a dimension she was experiencing for the very first time. Dr. Kenneth Ring, a prominent NDE researcher, studied Vicky's case for his book Mindsight, which focused on the NDEs of blind people. He found that Vicky's experience wasn't unique. The vast majority of the 31 blind individuals in his study reported some form of visual perception, many for the first time. From a neurological perspective, this should be impossible. Sight isn't just about having working eyes. It's about the brain's ability to process visual information. A person blind from birth, especially one with a destroyed optic nerve like Vicky, has a visual cortex that never developed the pathways to create sight. The brain simply doesn't know how. Yet, Vicky and others like her describe a form of perception clearer and more real than normal sight. Her case strongly suggests that the consciousness which separates from the body during an NDE is not dependent on the physical brain or its senses to perceive. It challenges the foundations of neuroscience and raises a profound question. If consciousness can see without eyes or a brain, then what is consciousness, and where does it truly reside? We're exploring some of the most profound questions of human existence. These stories challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and consciousness. If you find these accounts as fascinating as we do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We have so much more to explore, and you won't want to miss what's next. All right, let's get back to the accounts that have science scratching its head. Section 9. The Universal Phenomenon. The same story across the globe. While individual stories are incredibly powerful, perhaps the most compelling evidence for the reality of NDEs comes from the big picture. When researchers analyze thousands of accounts from all corners of the globe, a stunning pattern emerges. People from vastly different cultures with completely different beliefs are all telling the same core story. Think about it. A Christian farmer in Kansas, a Hindu engineer in Mumbai, a Buddhist monk in Thailand, and an atheist in Sweden all come close to death. They've never met, don't share a belief system, yet they describe a remarkably similar journey. This cross-cultural consistency is a massive challenge to the theory that these are just culturally conditioned hallucinations. Researchers have identified a common template that shows up again and again, the out-of-body experience, OBE. It often starts with floating out of the body and observing the scene below, peacefully detached. The tunnel. Many describe moving rapidly through a dark space or tunnel toward a light. The light. At the end is a light, described not as harsh, but as a being of pure love, acceptance, and intelligence. Meeting beings. Encounters with deceased loved ones or spiritual guides are incredibly common. The life review. Many report seeing their entire life flash before them, feeling the emotional impact their actions had on others. The boundary. There's often a sense of reaching a point of no return, a river, a fence, a door where crossing it means they can't go back. The return. A decision is made to return to the body, often with a new sense of purpose. Of course, the interpretation is filtered through a cultural lens. A Christian might call the light Jesus, a Hindu might see a deity, and an atheist might just call it a being of love. But the crucial part is that the underlying structure of the experience, the raw phenomena, is the same. This universality argues against the idea that NDEs are just products of personal expectation. If they were, you'd expect an ancient Viking to describe Valhalla. But that's not what researchers find. Instead, the core NDE seems to be a fundamental human experience that transcends cultural programming. While some scientists suggest this could be due to universal brain physiology, that doesn't fully explain the complexity and profound transformations that follow. The sheer weight of thousands of similar stories points toward a shared, objective reality at the threshold of death. Section 10. The Scientific Shockwave. Brain activity after death. For decades, the standard scientific explanation for NDEs has been the dying brain theory. As the brain is starved of oxygen, it goes haywire, producing a final, chaotic burst of activity that the mind sees as a hallucination. But what if that's wrong? What if, at the moment of death, the brain enters a state of heightened activity? Recent scientific discoveries are pointing in this shocking new direction. One of the biggest breakthroughs comes from Dr. Jimo Borgigian and her team at the University of Michigan. In a 2023 study, they monitored the brain activity of 4 comatose, dying patients right after life support was removed. In 2 of the patients, something extraordinary happened. In the moments after their hearts stopped beating and they were clinically dead, their brains suddenly lit up with a massive surge of high-frequency gamma waves. Why is this a big deal? because gamma waves are considered by many neuroscientists to be the neural correlates of consciousness. They're associated with complex functions like focus, memory, and perception. Finding a surge of these waves in a brain that's supposed to be non-functional is a biological paradox. The study found this gamma activity was concentrated in a hot zone in the back of the brain linked with conscious processing, dreaming, and visual perception. This wasn't a random flicker. It was a storm of organized neural activity, suggesting the brain was in a state of hyperarousal, not shutting down. As Dr. Borgine herself noted, there's something happening in the brain that makes no sense. This data directly challenges the dying brain theory. An oxygen-starved brain should show less organized activity, not more. A surge of coherent gamma waves suggests the brain, in its final moments, may be able to generate a highly lucid and complex conscious experience, exactly what NDE experiencers have been reporting for centuries. Now, researchers caution that this small study doesn't prove an afterlife. Some scientists propose it could be a final evolved survival mechanism. However, that explanation struggles to account for the profound and transformative nature of the experiences people report. What this new science does do is shatter the old assumption that clinical death means immediate brain death. It proves that the dying process is far more mysterious than we knew. It provides, for the first time, a potential physiological fingerprint for the near-death experience, moving it from anecdote into the world of measurable data. The brain, it turns out, doesn't just switch off. It might just be lighting up for one final, and perhaps most profound experience of all. Conclusion. So, where does all this leave us? We've heard from a surgeon who drowned and a neurosurgeon whose own brain was silenced. We've seen a woman watch her own surgery while clinically dead, and another heal from terminal cancer after a journey to the other side. We've looked at cases with small, verifiable details, like a set of lost dentures and impossible knowledge, like a 4-year-old boy meeting a sister he never knew he had. Individually, each story is a puzzle, but taken together alongside the cross-cultural consistency of thousands of accounts and the startling evidence of gamma wave surges in the dying brain, they paint a picture that's hard to ignore. The conventional view that consciousness is just a product of brain activity is starting to show serious cracks. These experiences suggest that consciousness may not be a temporary flicker in the dark, but something fundamental that the brain merely tunes into. The scientists and doctors who've encountered these cases have often been the most affected, their skepticism giving way to a sense of awe. We are left with a tantalizing possibility that the end of biological life may not be the end of our story, that the moment we call death might just be a doorway into a state of being more vast, more real, and more conscious than anything we can imagine. The evidence is mounting, and the scientific world is, at long last, paying attention. What they find may change everything,